Thanks everybody for coming virtually. And thank you especially to Peter and Martha for being our panel members today to share some of their experiences. I think I'll just hand it over to Peter just to say a wee bit about yourself, just so everybody kind of knows your background and experience.
Oh, okay. Well, for good or ill, I've had a lot of jobs. My wife and I ran companies up until 2007, 2008, when the whole world changed for everybody. And then I spent 10 years trying to figure out how to work for someone else, and I just could not. So I finally followed advice from others and got my license and looked at most of the major companies here in southeastern Wisconsin and had interviews with several and just kept coming back to, you know what, I'm late to the game. I can't learn from my own mistakes. I need training. And so I joined Keller Williams. I think my official start date was August 5th, 2019. And without hesitation, I can say that everything I thought, every hope I had has been more than validated, and there are benefits that I never even considered about the Keller Williams way and the help from my colleagues. I was a little taken aback when Amanda invited me, but I just came back to how much help I've gotten from so many other people. So when I'm asked, I think it's my job to give back. I only know what you folks have taught me, so I'm very happy to share and hope that it can help some other people.
Awesome. And as someone who's watched Peter through the Productivity and Launch program, I can tell you that even in this short amount of time, absorbing all of that information, it has come back out into awesome ways and great business. And we're so proud of you, Peter. We're just glad to have you here.
Well, I can't believe it's been 1 year already. That's awesome.
Right.
And then our next panelist is Martha Olla, and Martha's been in real estate for 23 years in a variety of roles. And I think that like all of the different roles you've played, Martha, have really given you like this well-rounded like expertise that I think help you handle tough situations that we're going to talk about today. Martha, do you want to share a little bit about your background? It looks like you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay, so Maureen, for many of you that know or may not know, Maureen Stelle is my sister, and she and I have, we formed our team 23 years ago, and back then it was just she and I. She was the front of the shop, I was the back of the shop. So I handled all of her admin, every single aspect of it. All she did was show buyers and show up at closings. I took care of everything else, and she handled negotiations. So I was self-taught and really learned everything from her, and I feel so fortunate. So I started this job when my third child was 6 months old, and my oldest, it was his first day of kindergarten. So now, you know, 23 years later, we're sending our fourth one off to college on Sunday. And our first three kids are all graduated from college and into their careers. And what's super fun is now that 6-month-old baby back in '98 is now in leadership at our KW Lake Country office, which is super fun. So we're glad to have her on board. So anyway, when we started KW 6 years ago, that's when I transitioned from admin to becoming a licensed agent. And so I've been doing that ever since. And so that's me.
Awesome. Great. Well, Amanda, thanks so much. Well, both of you guys, thanks for being here. And Amanda, do you want to kind of kick off how we'll start off today?
Yeah. So today we're talking about hiccups and surprises, things that pop up in transactions that can derail things. You know, we'll kind of touch on how everything that's going on in the world, the pandemic with COVID and you know, just the stressors of everything happening in the world and the media are having some effect on people and sort of amplifying what's going on. But I think a good thing to note at the start is that a lot of this could be prevented through some proactive measures and, you know, setting expectations, communicating clearly. You know, surprises are when people get upset, and that's when drama really unfolds, for the most part. And so we wanted to ask a couple questions of Martha and Peter about that, and then they've got some examples of situations they've been in, that they've learned from and that we can all learn from, that we'll touch on as well. So Steph, if you want to start with our first question.
Yeah, so when we talk about really being proactive to prevent things from deteriorating down the line, Martha, let's start with you. What do you do to kind of help prevent drama or surprises from happening during an offer process?
Sure.
The transaction?
So depending on who I'm representing, let's say I'm representing the buyer in a situation. First thing I always take into consideration, because I've been in this business for so long, the likelihood of me knowing or having a relationship with the agent on the other side is probably pretty good. And I know their negotiating style for the most part. And, you know, it's all about mirror and matching, you know, just like when you're working with a client, negotiate alongside the same style that that agent uses. And if you don't know the agent, give them a phone call before you're going to submit an offer. Ask questions. Try and, you know, get a vibe for how they communicate. Are they a texter? Are they an email? Or are they a phone call? You need to establish that right from the beginning. And then just presenting the facts. One of the key things that is super important that I've learned is don't get in the way of the transaction. Let your buyer or your seller make the decisions. It's your job to present the facts and help them make a solid decision without drama. Just keep it calm, because in this world of COVID, I think all of us that are, you know, top producers are experiencing a lot of buyers and sellers, agents, appraisers, lenders, all just super overworked, stressed out, and dealing with their own personal situations. So we just need to keep that in mind and just keep the contract the focus. And anyway, when I am working with a buyer, you know, I present the facts and explain to a buyer how to read a condition report if I'm showing the house. And I help them interpret what it is that the seller has disclosed. Start that dialogue right from the very beginning. I explain how to write a competitive offer if they're interested in that property, and how to interpret for a seller, you know, how to respond to an offer that they might be getting from a buyer. I explain to a buyer, you know, if you're going to write a low offer, or if you're writing in competition or what have you, there's 3 different ways that seller can respond to your offer. That seller may not respond with a counter offer. So write your highest and best, especially if you're competing. If you're writing a low offer, prepare your buyer for a seller not even responding to it. And then number 3, a seller could respond with a counter offer. So always establish all of that when you're in the offer writing process, whether you're dealing with a first-time home buyer or someone that's, you know, bought and sold 5 properties. This is not their job. They don't remember the details, and our industry is always changing. So
I love that. It sounds like really you try to prep them on what to expect or what could happen a few steps ahead of where you are, to really educate them on how the process works.
And those conversations are all starting at the property when I'm showing the house, right? And I even talk about, you know, your inspector is going to point that out, you know, like if we notice something at a house. And then I start a little bit of dialogue about the purpose of a home inspection. You know, the purpose of a home inspection is for the inspector to identify defects and safety items, not getting caught up in maintenance items like chipping paint and things like that. So you have a lot of conversations when you're walking buyers through the house outside of the house itself.
Are you finding that a lot of these conversations or points that you're reminding them multiple times throughout the process?
Yes, yes. So you're starting that little dialogue about the home inspection and the purpose of a home inspection when you're showing a house. And then when you're drafting the offer for them and you get to the part about the home inspection contingency, you're going over that again. And then there's boilerplate language in the offer that defines exactly what's considered to be a defect and a safety item. So it's all right there in the offer.
Awesome. Peter, how about you? Anything to add to that in terms of how you're kind of prepping your clients to prevent any of these surprises from happening?
I should preface this by saying that when Amanda first proposed the panel, the topic was going to be remaining calm through a transaction. And I shared that with my wife, that I'd been invited to sit on a panel about remaining calm, and her response was, ha, 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 and then a full-on laugh. And by the time she recovered enough to be able to speak again, and she wasn't being unkind, she just said, do they even know you? So kind of the analogy of a duck, everything looking calm on the surface. But with me, there's a lot more going on than just a couple of feet paddling underneath. So I have to really watch how I'm reacting and just remain calm. Take the emotion out of it, because there's enough emotion from the buyer or the seller. They get so wrapped up. This is such a personal decision for them. And we just, I think, have to pull back and try to take that emotion out of it. Acknowledge it, but then just say, let's just take this one step at a time. And all of this response comes from leaning into the training, not just Keller Williams National, but from the first time that I sat in Ignite and heard Janine say, talk about the roller coaster of emotions that people go through, from being so excited to make an offer or accept an offer, to getting the inspection report where both parties think the house is falling apart and someone gets mad, someone gets scared, and just, being able to guide people to taking a step back from that.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. So for both of you, we will go back to Martha. In terms of what's going on in the world right now and people being at an even higher level of stress and emotion and sensitivity, have you adjusted any of the things that you have traditionally done in response to that?
I can honestly say I'm trying to have most of my communication with the co-broke be a phone call versus relying solely on text. We all know that text can be misinterpreted, and you can accomplish so much more in a phone call, especially if it's a sticky counteroffer or inspection issue or appraisal issue or what have you. You can accomplish a lot in a phone call. I know that it's a question that's further down the road of providing an example of an inspection situation, but we resolved it between agents in a phone call, and I came to learn that the seller was being extremely difficult to the agent. You don't know what's going on between the listing agent and their client. They just have to diffuse that anxiety and try and keep their transaction going. So if you establish that and kind of get a vibe for what's going on with the seller, you're gonna learn that through your communication with the co-broke. I can say that is honestly the takeaway from this entire presentation today is the communication line that you keep open with your co-broke is going to get you to the closing table.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. Yeah, phone calls go such a long way. Mm-hmm. Peter, how about you? With I know it wasn't very long that you were in business before this all changed, so this may just be the way that you're used to, but is there anything that you've rethought or adjusted based on people being more sensitive at this point?
Just to kind of go along with what Martha had said, I start with a phone call on the buy side before the first showing. And other agents really appreciate that. I think it might be unusual. I think people are relying on text or email. So when you call somebody, they sometimes seem surprised. When I got into the business, one of the first pieces of advice I got from someone else, from another broker, was it takes two. Always remember, it takes two people to make a deal. You got to have a co-broke. Whether you're on the list side or the buy side, you're going to be doing this with someone else, and be respectful. I just tried to, since COVID started, and yeah, you're right. I mean, this is new for me, but it's new for everyone. For me, these are the good old days. But this has really thrown a wrench into everyone, and we're all kind of figuring this out as we go. So I just decided to, with help and advice from others, rely more on compassion, realize that everybody's stressed, and just do whatever we can to effectively represent our clients, but be respectful and try to understand what the other party might be going to.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and you guys have kind of touched on it a little bit, the biggest, like the greatest odds of a transaction going south generally happens around the inspection. And Martha, you kind of hinted, about some of the prep you did for your clients. Talk to us a little bit more, maybe from a seller perspective of how you're guiding your clients through the inspection process, both before inspection or maybe at time of list inspection, and then when you get that amendment from a seller perspective.
Okay. So first thing you do, obviously, when you're meeting with your client is you're going over the disclosures as well as the listing contract. You can't guide your seller on how to complete the condition report. If they have questions about it, you have to direct them to an attorney because we cannot give legal advice on how to complete a condition report. The only thing that we can tell them is read it very carefully. Better to over disclose than to not disclose. It's nice that the new condition report has the explanation boxes at each category. It didn't used to have that. So even if it's something minor, the explanation in that explanation box is very helpful. So, okay, then we get through that. All right, fine. Then we prepare our seller. It's a first-time seller. They don't know what to expect from an inspection, even though they went through one when they bought the house. You're just telling them things like, make sure the house is show ready, be prepared for buyers to be in the house with the inspector for probably 4 hours, maybe. They'll open cabinets, they'll open drawers, they will measure, they will be there, and it's their opportunity to learn about the house. Depending on how the offer is written, there could be further inspections that come up as a result of the home inspection. Just keep your seller calm. Just let them know that this is a buyer's opportunity. It's fact-finding time. They have a right to their inspections, and not to get undone until we see an amendment, right? Sometimes they may want to do all these inspections and know that they're taking on certain things, especially if they were competing. It helps them understand what to prepare for once they close on the property. Don't be threatening. Don't question the agent on the other side. What are they bringing in a foundation inspection for? The inspector said the basement is dry and it's fine. Why are they doing that? It all depends on how they drafted the contract. If they wrote in a foundation inspection, and I just had this happen 2 weeks ago, so speaking from a little bit of experience, I wrote into the offer for my buyer that they could have a foundation inspection. Well, a home inspector didn't call out anything in the foundation, but buyer has paranoia over seepage in a basement based on her previous home. So she wanted to make sure that the foundation was looked at by a professional. And the seller was giving resistance, saying, nope, I'm not letting any further inspections in, not letting anyone else in the door. They're just going to look for problems. And I reminded that agent that that's how they wrote the offer. They're entitled to a foundation inspection. So, push came to shove, and yes, they let us in the door. So just be very careful on how you draft your offers, especially when you're calling out certain type of inspections outside of the home inspection. And everything turned out fine. Buyer was fully prepared for the seller not willing to do anything. It came up that the sump pumps were improperly installed, but buyer fully knew that they were going to have that taken care of. Again, it was fact finding, and that was what I told the co-broke what we were doing in order to allow that. Simply fact finding. It's going to cost the buyer about $1,000 to get this rectified, but they know that and they're prepared.
That's great. And then Peter, how about from a buyer's perspective for inspections? What are you doing to kind of keep them calm and focused?
Reminding them of the way that, I think the first thing starts with reminding them of the way home inspections seem to have transitioned. When we bought our current home 10 years ago, the inspection report was 8 pages. It used to be, in my opinion, that home inspectors were generally people from the trades, people from city government, or code inspectors, people that knew buildings. It has transitioned. There are a lot of people out now that have bought franchises and are following a franchise model. In either case, it's difficult for home inspectors right now because we are in a litigious society. Their first goal, I think, in many cases, is to make sure they don't get sued. So they're pointing out a lot of things that may or may not be important. And the important thing to talk to talk people off the ledge and say, just wait, okay, the house is not falling apart. We're looking for things that have to do with the roof, the foundation, the plumbing, the electrical, health and safety issues. If there are deferred maintenance issues, we can talk about that. Let's just wait. Let's just take a step back. I had a situation where the buyer said that he had his own guy coming through. It's no problem. I've got the inspector. He'll take care of it. Comes in, and it turns out, unbeknownst to me, that the home inspector that he hired was not a Wisconsin state licensed home inspector. So there's very little that can be done on the contract level from something that he called out. In fact, there's nothing that can be done. And we did the same thing. They asked for an inspection of the sewer lateral. And the seller said, no, we're not going to allow that. You had your kick at the can. You did not bring in a licensed inspector. So I had to go back to the buyer and say, here's what's going on. I didn't know this guy wasn't licensed. He gave you an idea of what was going on, but they're not going to allow anymore. What do you want to do? What is your thought? And so not making a decision for him. Keller says we don't sell homes or buy homes for people. We help them make good decisions. So I just laid everything out for him. Here's what your options are. And as we left the home after the final walkthrough, I shook his hand. I said, see you at the table. And he grabbed my hand with both of his, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, thank you. I could never have gotten through this without your steady hand, without you taking the emotion out of this. So I think that's kind of what we're called to do, is just present information in a straightforward way and try to get the emotion out of it. Everybody wants the deal to close in most cases.
Yeah.
So I think it's our job to facilitate that. As long as we're continuing to talk, as long as we're being respectful of each other's position and understanding, there's a chance that we're going to close the deal.
One thing I wanted to mention, Stephanie, was as far as the seller goes, I always remind them when we're going through that inspection process before we see the amendment. The buyer can ask for whatever they want. And I tell the buyer the same thing if I'm representing a buyer. You can ask for whatever you want on that inspection amendment. It should be specific to defects and safety items. Seller has the right to respond with some, none, or all. Seller cannot cancel the contract on you. They can respond with a different amendment or just say they're doing nothing. So there might be some back and forth.
Yeah, I like that some, none, or all, because sometimes buyers think, well, that's not fair. It's broken or it's a defect. That doesn't mean they have to do anything. So I do think prepping them, like you said, some, none, or all, is really good to set the tone.
And one other thing is again, communication with the agent. Are there secondary offers? That's going to change the way inspection negotiations are going to go. If there's a couple secondary offers, seller may say, nope, not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the middle of a situation like that where we got the inspection report on Sunday and both parties freaked out. I mean, lost their stuff. And both are ready to walk, but I'm not going to do anything. Well, I'm not buying this anymore. So just telling people that, okay, they have some concerns. They're going to present something. You have an option. You can accept the amendment as written, reject it as written, or counter it. But first, let's not assume that this deal is going south. Let's wait for the other side to respond and see what's most important to them. As long as we're talking, as long as we're communicating, as long as we understand that they want this to go to close, we can work any detail out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is like reminding people that the report is going to look like the house is falling apart. It's going to be totally scary and terrible, but the focus is what's the amendment going to be, or what's the request going to be. So I think that's a good reminder that both of you mentioned. So moving into some other real life examples, one thing I have definitely come across more often in this very competitive market is people getting cold feet. So they're all about it. It's an aggressive, offer. They know they're in competition. They get caught up in it. Their offer gets accepted, and their response is, "Oh no," or they're excited for a few days and then they're not anymore. Peter, you had something like that recently. How did that all come together, or
The
not?
buyer made the buyer was actually a real estate agent who showed up to the first open house. Did not identify that she was an agent until later, inferred that she had a client who might be interested, and submitted an offer for herself way, way, way under asking. And I presented it to the sellers, and they said, don't even respond. So I just waited a little while. She asked if they were going to respond. I said, I'm talking with them right now. And then she came back and submitted an offer. It was a very good offer. It was on March 29th. We did a couple of amendments. The offer was accepted on March 30th. And she'd been in the house 3 times, several hours. And on April 1st, she called back and she said, oh, I didn't realize the home didn't have air conditioning. That's a deal breaker for me. I said, excuse me? And she said, and my ex got let go. And so my finances are kind of in question. So I have to withdraw. I'm going to get a refusal letter from my mortgage company. I said, well, wait, don't do that. That's going to take some time. We'll just camera it. Oh, we can't really. I said, yeah, we'll just camera it. We'll release you. You haven't paid the security deposit yet. I'll drop the papers and send them over. Because this was during a hot market. We'd had several people. This was, the home started just before COVID. So we'd had several people through already, and there were several interested parties. My goal was to get the house free of that offer and back on the market as quickly as possible. So I talked with the owners. I suggested that to them. It was kind of difficult communication because the house was listed because they were going through a divorce. So again, having to understand where both parties were and just trying to be calm with the communication. These people backed out. Let's get you back on the market as quickly as possible, especially since we have the weekend coming up. So I presented the camera. She didn't sign it for 2 days. And so I had to call her and say, I'm sorry this is taking you so long. I understand this is a difficult situation. You may be embarrassed, but if I don't hear from you, I'm going to have to call your broker. And we got the signed camera back on April 2nd, and on April 4th, we had an offer that went through to close. So
Nice.
just
So keeping that perspective.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, keeping that perspective on what's the real goal here, what are we trying to make happen, time is of the essence.
And during that process, I asked for advice from you, Amanda, and from you, Steph, and from my mentor, Andy. And one thing Steph said, you know what? I give news to people. I give bad news first. Let them know what's going on. And Amanda, one thing I keep coming back, and I use it with people all the time. Every buyer now has lost out on at least one deal. And you had said something months ago, and I don't even really remember. These things always work out. They always work out for the best. If this isn't the one, the next one is going to be the one that's going to work out for you. So, and that's what I said with these sellers. For some reason, this is not meant to be. We'll just move along. We'll get another offer. It's going to sell. So we'll just remain calm. We'll go follow the steps. We have a process for canceling these deals. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. I'll get you back on the market. So that's what happened.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it does sound pretty hokey to say that, and some people don't buy into it, but a lot of the people I work with, sometimes you do just have to like give it up to, it's out of our control. This must not be meant to be. It's going to work out for the best, just to help people kind of reset their minds about it. And sometimes that can be really helpful.
It does seem a little soft, a little squishy, but it always works in my experience. Everyone has said, oh, I guess you're right. And it calms people down because this is very trying for people. It calms people down to have that perspective and to have that thought in their head, because it switches their perspective. Oh yeah, this isn't isn't the end of anything. There's going to be something else.
Exactly. So I know Peter has one more example, but we'll switch over to Martha. Steph, if you want to introduce that next experience that Martha's going to talk about, and then Peter will come back to you and back to Martha.
So Martha, I've noticed.
A lot of notes. See, I'm prepared.
Awesome. So Martha, I mean, we are seeing very competitive market in some price points. And I personally had 2 appraisals come in kind of low. So can you talk to us about working with a client through a low appraisal when they start to freak out? Because I think, again, when we think about the points of the transaction that would be more likely to go south, appraisal is one of them.
Okay. So from a buyer's perspective or a seller, who am I working with?
Whichever one you want to do.
Okay. So again, we'll go back to when you're listing a property and coming up with a price, right? One conversation you're having with your seller is, let's keep in mind that you need to keep your focus on your price based on the comps, price per square foot, and assessed value. Because the appraiser is going to be looking at all 3 of those areas as well, and is pulling the same comps that we are. So somewhere in here, something needs to support your list price, okay? If they price their property high based on the tools that you've brought to the table, I always prepare that seller for, you know, we might run into a problem with appraisal. I always set that tone right from the very beginning. So that way, if we do have an issue with appraisal, it's not a surprise, okay? Sometimes, you know, a seller just won't listen, and they're gonna wanna price their house the way they see it. And then they'll learn, because the market will respond, or the appraiser will, okay? So let's say that appraisal comes in at 300, and the purchase price is 325. The lender will only loan on the appraised value, okay? So there's a $25,000 difference between appraised value and purchase price. Who's going to pay that difference? How is this going to come together? The seller has a right to hire their own appraiser just to see how that value comes out. The listing agent has to provide the appraisal to, or I'm sorry, the buyer's agent needs to supply the appraisal report to the listing agent when normally that's not required, or they don't have to do that. So anyway, all right, they do their own appraisal. They might come up with a different number. Okay, fine. There could be some back and forth going on. And it also really depends on how the offer was written too. Did buyer give seller right to cure on appraisal? In the circumstance where they do give seller right to cure on appraisal, that's when you can renegotiate like what I'm describing. If they don't give seller right to cure on appraisal, then there's no renegotiating like this. So anyway, typically the goal would be buyer and seller meet halfway, 50-50. If buyer's able to come up with another, you know, in this example, 12,500, and seller is agreeing to reduce their price, 12,500, we've got to win. Both sides, you know, are given a little bit. Buyer may not have 12,500 to bring to the table. Then that makes the seller say, well, what am I going to do? Reduce my price 25,000 to get this to the closing table? By the time the appraisal comes in, buyer and seller have already negotiated inspection. So seller has to, you know, consider, do I want to start all over putting the house back on the market and look for another buyer and go through inspection all over again? Buyer's going to see that house is back on the market and deal 1 fell apart. They may not get as good of an offer as they did with the first one. It can hurt a little bit. So they might, you know, they might be better off just reducing their price and moving forward. Situations are always different, but that's typically how I see it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Amanda, do you want to talk about our next scenario?
Yeah. So also a bit to that, I think it's good to note that if it's an FHA appraisal, it sticks with the house. So if you've got a seller who's like, well, we'll just roll the dice on a new one, they're not going to get anywhere if it's FHA. So Peter, you had something come up not too long ago that wasn't really tied to appraisal from what I understand, but it was at the point of loan commitment that things unfortunately unraveled. And tell us a little bit about what happened and how you approached it to save the deal.
Believe it or not, it was the same house that I just described before. The buyer came through with an FHA loan, and a loan commitment about 10 days after the offer. And I was talking with or trying to talk with the co-broke, whom I never spoke with on the phone, and who was very spotty in his communication responses with text or email. FHA requirements had changed due to COVID shortly before this offer came in. So I asked for some proof of credit score, and the guy said, no, it's no problem. This loan was applied for through a major national bank. Said, don't worry about it, everything's going to be fine. They came to the point of asking to, we had a mid-May close, and the agent asked for an April close, which was fine for the sellers because they wanted to move on with their lives. So we prepared the amendment, sent over to adjust the closing date, and the amendment never came back, and the guy never responded. It took me a while to figure out that this major national bank had denied the loan commitment less than 2 weeks before the scheduled close date. And not that it's material to the situation, but the buyer was an employee of that bank. So it got really crazy. They identified a couple of different other loan providers possible, but without much communication from the co-broke, I decided I was going to be calling the loan originator that they were working with, the people that were going to be saving the deal. They assured me that everything was fine. I called them every day. It took a while to get the FHA appraisal transferred over. We were unsure the day before closing whether we were going to be able to commit, whether that they were going to be able to get the loan commitment, and whether we were going to be able to close. So I didn't tell the sellers all of this. I just said, we're working on it, we're hopeful. It finally came through. The company that rescued the deal in less than 2 weeks did finally get everything done, but it's pretty stressful. Try to get your buyers to not work with national banks. They're very difficult. A local loan provider is always better. A local mortgage, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How did you keep your sellers calm? I know you said you didn't like give them all the details and get them in the mire of everything, but like, how did you keep them calm as you were like, we're figuring it out, we're working on it? Like, were they totally freaking out, or how did that go?
The communication between the two of them had almost stopped at that point. They really disliked each other. I put them both on the same email chain and on the same text chain to make sure that I was communicating with both of them at the same time, so that at least they would see the communication at the same time. And I just said, you know, I gave them a report every day of what the other loan officer was saying on the positive side, not on the negative side, because they had already had one deal fall apart. I didn't want to be telling them that this next deal was going to fall apart until we knew. And then at that point, you know, then we have options that we can exercise. But I was acting as if and communicating as if this was going to close, and fortunately it did. Now it went the day after the close. The guy who wrote the offer picked a weekend date, so we actually closed on the Monday after. But it all worked out in the end, and it was just being in constant communication, being kind of pesky to the people who were doing their best to save the deal, calling them in either the local number or their national number, calling the loan originator, calling the loan officer, calling the customer service people, just trying to stay on top of it.
Nice. So kind of coming back to what Martha mentioned at the beginning, that communication, being on the phone, keeping everybody on the same page, kind of helping
And
work through
persistently
that.
advocating for your client.
Yes. Awesome. Steph, we have one more scenario with Martha.
Yeah, Martha,
as well.
do you have like a real life experience from a transaction you can think about where it was a hairy inspection negotiation and you and that co-broke kind of worked through it together, and how you did that?
Sure. So I'll go back to the one that I was providing the example on earlier. Again, how I drafted the offer was allowing for further inspections and, you know, the roadblock that the seller had. Keeping that line of communication open. Okay, so let's use a different example. A buyer that takes a look at an inspection report and there's a lot of defects on there and they're kind of freaked out about it. And then I'm dealing with a defensive agent on the other side, okay? I always tell the buyer, it seems scary when you first look at that inspection report, like all of you have, talked about today. Just pick it apart and focus on what's most important for you here, and make a list of priorities. What do you want to see accomplished from this negotiation? What can you not live with, right? And then, you go ahead and you get your additional contractors to go through there and, kind of work through that. But again, it's all kind of situational, where depends on the seller situation, depends on if you're competing, depends on so many things, or if they're paying very far above asking price, kind of reminding the agent on the other side, these guys paid, X amount over asking. They're expecting to have a pretty perfect house because that's how this has been presented. Every scenario is a little bit different, and you can catch the vibe if the seller's digging their heels in, and you just have to keep coaching your buyer through. Just keep coaching them through. Mm-hmm. And, there are so many different examples of inspections, but that's just pretty much the most important thing to always keep in mind.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you.
Steph, you had a good question too, kind of tied to that, is if you're in that situation and you are needing to connect your client with a contractor or an expert, whether you're serving as the go-between or you're connecting your client directly to that expert. I'm curious, Martha, how you generally approach that.
Let's say, for example, you need to bring in a roofer and a foundation guy, okay? I will say to the buyer, do you have anybody in mind that you work with, maybe that worked on your old house or whatever? And they'll say, no, I don't. I'll say, okay, here's a couple of contractors that I recommend. I'd be glad to, give them a call and get them scheduled. Just let me know who you'd like to line up. And then they'll say, if they don't have anybody, then I'll just go off my list. And then they'll get their report. And then I always put buyer and the contractor together. I don't want to interpret that. Just same example for today with COVID, with a lot of these sight unseen offers or buyers unable to come in from out of town to attend inspection. I put the inspector directly in touch with the buyer. They can talk about the inspection report. It's not my job to interpret it, because I don't want to give, the wrong impression of the takeaway from that inspection. Could get me into trouble. So home inspector, contractors directly in touch with the buyer.
How do you get them to actually do that? Because I'll have buyers who are, let's say, a little removed and they want you to kind of do the legwork. Are you then getting the report and just sending it to them and saying you need to connect with the roofer, or
you know what, it all kind of depends. Roofers oftentimes will go there on their own. Mm-hmm. Always make sure that you're letting the listing agent know, XYZ roofer is stopping at the house tomorrow morning sometime between 8 and noon. You have got to get permission from the seller for anyone to enter the premises. Okay, make sure, things like that I will put in text or email so I have record of that communication. There are some things that need to be a phone call, but then there are some things that need to be documented, right? Well, you never told me. Well, yes, I did. Here's the text, or here's the email. It can get a little bit annoying if you're dealing with an agent that won't respond to texts or emails and all they want is a phone call. But again, mirror and match, you have to kind of roll with how they want to communicate. Anyway, back to your question on the contractors. I will, so the roofer goes over to the house, they send me the report. Always make sure that you give the name of the client for that report, not your name on that report as agent, right? And then you can provide the roofer with the email address for your buyer. And then I'll always follow up with the buyer and say, here's XYZ roof report, I would recommend that you call him directly to discuss his findings, right? It's not my job to interpret mouse or an elephant. It's the roofer's job.
I like that. That's great.
That's one thing that I talked with buyers about and sellers as well. I cannot give you advice in areas in which I do not have expertise. I'm not a roofer. I'm not a foundation guy. There are people that you can refer to. I can put you in touch with some of those people, but I can't give you advice that way.
Yeah. I could say like, it's been my experience, or I've seen that or something, but I never say what you should do is blah, blah, blah. Right.
Smart.
Yeah, it's good to keep that in mind, just to not add your own drama to the situation by opening up yourself for potential legal issues later.
Mm-hmm. So I think we also wanted to open up questions from the group too. Is there anyone that has a question for Martha or Peter? It looks like everyone's on mute. So if you, Sharon, are you trying to ask a question? It looks like you're on mute, Sharon.
I think Sharon was, and I think Catherine is.
Maybe she's on the phone.
You know,
Okay.
one thing I also want to mention, you guys, is throughout that inspection process, continue the dialogue with your buyer about closing cost credits. Explain to them what closing cost credits can do for them when they respond to an amendment. Also, make sure that you're communicating with the co-broke before you even draft the offer. Find out what's the situation with the seller. Are they moving out of state? If it's an elderly person, are they going to a retirement home? All of those things are very important for you as an agent for your buyer to understand, okay, they're moving, they're downsizing, they're moving to a retirement home, ding, ding, ding. Anything that comes up in inspection, they're not gonna wanna take care of. They would prefer to give a price reduction or a credit, okay? They're moving out of state, it's a relocation company, that's a whole nother conversation, but they're moving out of state. They're not here to manage work to be done post-inspection. So one piece of homework for you as a buyer's agent is to reach out to the lender, find out what's the max amount they can ask for in closing cost credits. Because, you know,
from a logistic point of view, as regards to questions, the host might have everyone muted except for Martha, Amanda, Steph, and I. So maybe if someone had a question, you could throw it in the chat and we could respond that way.
Yeah, Martha, I think that's a really good point too, to whether like understanding how many credits your buyer can get. And then when you start to discuss the inspection, I check with my buyers to say, would you prefer things to be done prior to closing? Are you okay taking a credit or a price reduction and the difference of what that means in terms of putting money in their pocket? And then also asking the sellers the same questions, you know, or the seller, the buyer's agent, I'm sorry, the listing agent, the same question to say, are you aware if the seller has a preference? Because if you can strategically draft your amendment to what's most desirable to the seller, but still accomplishing what you want for your buyer, it'll just be a smoother process.
And for newer agents, it takes time and practice and talking with your mentor or Stephanie and Amanda on how to craft these kinds of amendments. Takes a lot of experience when you get into some ugly inspections on how to handle that.
Yeah.
And not to raise flags
that
to
wording
underwriting. Gotta be careful.
And I think Martha brings up a great point in terms of always like using each other to work through scenarios. I think one of the biggest misconceptions when newer agents are that the veteran agents don't have questions too and don't kind of run things by each other. And I'm always calling other agents to get their advice or experience. I've called Martha before about transactions just to check in to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Do you have any suggestions? Like we call each other all the time.
Yeah.
So use.
Yeah, I agree.
I still have to.
I'm taking a bunch of notes today. It's just a good reminder.
I still have to ask Maureen, what am I doing about this? And this most recent one, she said, oh God, I have no idea.
Awesome. Well, any other questions, you guys?
Just one thing. I mentioned the help that Janine had given me, that Steph had given me, that Amanda had given me. my mentor, when we had the old mentor program, was Andy Stillman, and there's things that I keep coming back to that he has shared with me. Be excellent. Be compassionate. And I mentioned something that I was concerned about during a transaction, and he said, stop. You are worried about something over which you have no control.
Mm-hmm.
Let it go. Let things happen. React when you know what the other side wants. Don't anticipate. And for my fellow new agents, the help from other agents is so valuable, and they are so willing to help. The only thing I know about this business is what people have taught me in the last year.
Right. Remember, we're a coaching and training company. That's where our value is. You know, well, I just missed my thought. Shoot. Oh, remember, you might have another transaction with this agent down the road. If you're writing on one of their listings competitively, first thing that you look at as a listing agent, you've got 5 offers in front of you. First thing I look at is who's the agent that wrote the offer. I don't even care how much the offer is, or if it's a cash offer or whatever. The agent that wrote the offer is telling me if we're going to get to the closing table or not, or if there's going to be problems. You want to be the agent that they look at first to say they're a closer. I encourage you to work with this offer, Mr. Seller, right? Thank your
I
agent.
second that for sure.
Yep. Thank your agent after a closing. Remember to do those little things. Write notes. All those little details. The agents on the other side, they appreciate that.
Mhm.
And that's definitely an advantage for your client, right? You're setting them up for success, or future clients for success, by having those great relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it certainly makes a difference. I had an agent who I was working with say to me, I'm really concerned about my reputation with my client, and so this is why I'm behaving this way. And my response was, it's important that you're representing your client and you have a good relationship, but it's also equally important in this transaction and moving forward that you have a great relationship with your co-broke.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as important, if not more, because we are going to bump into each other again at some point. So I think that's a great point, Martha.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. Well, thanks
Great.
everyone for participating. Thank you, Martha and Peter, for sharing your experiences.
Happy to.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
we appreciate your time. Thanks everybody for coming. We wish you smooth transactions.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
all right. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.